welcome back to Witch Daily's countdown to Halloween, our Samhain countdown, getting you ready for the amazing witchy season of Halloween and Samhain. I hope you are starting to feel the air tingle a little bit as we get closer to the magic season, the magic time of Samhain. I don't know about you, but as Samhain gets closer, I often start to have more unusual experiences, shall we say, as the veil gets to be a little thinner. So I want to encourage you, if that's happening for you, don't be freaked out by it. It's perfectly normal. As Samhain gets closer, the veil between the worlds is said to become thinner, and so people and animals that have passed on have more access to us, and we have more access to them. So if you're starting to see spooky stuff happen, don't be freaked out. It's perfectly normal. The other thing that's happening right now is we are experiencing some Mercury retrograde energy. Don't know if you felt that. I'm going to talk a little bit about Mercury retrograde today, but also talk a little bit about the things that happen around the beginning and the end of Mercury retrograde. So Mercury retrograde is an astrological phenomenon where the planet Mercury appears, though it is not actually happening that way, it just looks that way from our vantage point on Earth, where Mercury appears to be going backwards in the sky. So that's called retrograde motion, and what happens is it affects the Earth in such weird ways. And I don't know if you've met anybody that will just say, oh my God, Mercury retrograde, but undoubtedly it always affects people. It especially affects witches. And what happens is anything that requires communication, anything that you find the planet Mercury, so the god Mercury is all about communication. The planet Mercury is the closest one to the sun, and so it's got the shortest trip. So a couple times a year, 3 or 4 times a year, we get this Mercury retrograde motion, and when it happens that way, everything kind of falls apart. So anything that requires efficient communication is somehow affected. So computers are affected, internet is affected, work is affected, schedules are affected, mechanics, machinery is affected. And a lot of people say that you should not make any big decisions or make any big changes during a Mercury retrograde period. So if you are thinking you're going to buy a car, or you're thinking that you're going to get married, maybe you should wait until the Mercury retrograde period is over before you make that kind of big decision, to get the clarity of Mercury that you would normally have, because tends that people are a little more foggy during Mercury retrograde. And I know that may sound crazy to you, but I tell you, it's totally true. The other thing that happens with Mercury retrograde is there's a shadow period. And the shadow period in astrology, you can think of kind of like the change, right? So it's kind of like the yellow light when you're driving down the street. So the shadow period of Mercury is when things start to shift and adjust. And personally, I find that the shadow period is much worse than the actual retrograde for me. So the retrograde period usually is a time when I'm like cleaning up loose ends, I'm like finishing things. That's another thing Mercury retrograde is actually good for, is getting things completed that have been dangling for a long time. But the time before, like the 5 days before Mercury goes retrograde, and then the 5 days before it goes, or as it's going direct, my life is a mess and everything is just crazy, which happens to be right now. So what you'll find is, if you want to use the Mercury retrograde period properly, then the thing to do is to just notice as things are a little wacky or out of sorts. Just notice it. Don't turn it into anything. Don't assume that somebody's cursed you or there's something wrong or you made a mistake. It's most likely just Mercury retrograde. And the way forward with it is to just notice it and try to let yourself not be overwhelmed by the craziness. So take extra time if you need to go somewhere. Build it into your schedule. If you need to get to work and you're driving and you're finding that there's more traffic or there's more weirdness, then just leave a few minutes earlier or a few minutes later. Another thing would be, like I said earlier, don't make any big decisions during a Mercury retrograde period. Don't make any big purchases. Don't buy a car, don't buy a house during Mercury retrograde. The trick is, though, The thing that Mercury retrograde is good for is finishing things, completing things that have been hanging out in the ether for a while. So if you've been trying to buy a particular house and it's had lots of problems or complications, that's fine to do during a Mercury retrograde period because you've already been in the throes of it before the period began. If you've been trying to finish a project, it's really good to finish during Mercury retrograde. It becomes easier and smoother. Mercury retrograde is really good for kind of going inward and doing that inner work, especially if you're stuck at home or you have things that, loose ends you need to tie up. That's what it's good for. It's also good for healing relationships of communication. So if there's been someone from whom you have been estranged, and you are feeling that you have the reserves to make a connection there, Mercury retrograde is really good for that too. I will warn you though that if you or the other person have communication issues, I'd wait until after that Mercury retrograde period is over, because communication is much harder during a Mercury retrograde. So if you're looking to clean something up, but you're not a good communicator, or the other person's not a good communicator, or you don't know what you want to say, wait till after the Mercury retrograde is over. And wait till at least 5 days till after Mercury goes direct. So that is what you need to know about Mercury retrograde as we're moving forward in our Samhain season. So yeah, you can have a little help by paying attention to the Mercury retrograde action, and don't take it too seriously. Don't let it stop you from living your life, but just be aware of it so that if things are confused or messed up, or everybody's getting your order wrong, or you're not getting your groceries delivered properly, or your car keeps having issues, or your computer's glitching, or your internet's going slow, just chalk it up to Mercury retrograde. Take care of those things. Be careful that they don't break, but don't take it too personally. That's it for this lesson today, and I'm so excited that you're with us. We are having so much fun doing these videos, and I really, really am looking forward to continuing as we get through the Samhain season. So I hope you're having a great witchy day, and I hope you have lots of magic in your life.